I'm Lorraine, 62 years old, a retired English teacher from Boston. My daughter Amanda's wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, and the proudest of mine. Instead, it turned into a public spectacle when she slapped me hard across the face in front of 200 guests. But when I laughed instead of crying and said those 3 words, her perfect mask cracked completely. If you're watching this, drop a comment saying where you're from, hit that subscribe button, and stay until the end to learn what happens when decades-old secrets finally surface at the worst possible moment. My life had been relatively simple before Amanda's engagement. After losing my husband Michael 15 years ago, I'd devoted myself to finishing raising our daughter alone. I taught high school English in the same school for 30 years, living in the modest colonial house Michael and I had purchased when Amanda was just a baby. Amanda, now 29, had always been particular about appearances. Even as a child, she needed to have the right clothes, the right friends, the right everything. As a teenager, she became increasingly difficult, rebellious, secretive, and sometimes manipulative. I attributed it to normal adolescent behavior and the loss of her father at 14. I tried everything to maintain our relationship, but as she grew older, the distance between us only widened. When she introduced me to James Westbrook, her boyfriend of 6 months, I felt an immediate unease. He was 32, conventionally handsome, with perfect teeth and expensive suits, and came from the kind of old-money Boston family that moved in circles far above my middle-class teacher's life. Amanda glowed when she was with him, but something in his smile never quite reached his eyes. I dismissed my concerns as maternal overprotectiveness. What mother thinks anyone is good enough for her daughter? The engagement announcement came at an uncomfortably formal dinner at Royale, one of Boston's most expensive restaurants. I wore my best dress, but still felt like a country mouse among the Westbrooks, with their tailored clothes and casual references to their summer home in the Hamptons and winter trips to St. Bart's. Amanda kept correcting my table manners with subtle nudges and significant glances. "Mother, you use the outside fork first," she whispered sharply when I reached for the wrong utensil. I noticed how she said mother now instead of mum when the Westbrooks were around. It was as if she were auditioning for a role in their family. James's parents, Edward and Caroline Westbrook, barely acknowledged me throughout dinner. Caroline asked about my little job at the school, then promptly changed the subject when I began talking about my students. Edward mostly spoke to James about their investment firm, occasionally tossing questions to Amanda about her marketing career at a luxury hotel chain. "She's being groomed for Director of Client Relations," Edward announced proudly, as if he'd had something to do with her success. Amanda beamed at his approval, while I sat silently, having heard nothing about this potential promotion. As wedding planning began, I found myself increasingly sidelined. Despite contributing nearly $30,000 from my retirement savings, a significant amount for me, my opinions were rarely sought and never heeded. "The Westbrooks have connections, Mother," Amanda explained, when I questioned why I hadn't been invited to tour venues. "They got us into Fairmont Estate on 6 months' notice when they normally book 2 years out." I later discovered the venue alone cost $50,000. The final blow came 3 months before the wedding, when I accidentally overheard Amanda speaking to Caroline on the phone in my kitchen. "Yes, I know she's a bit embarrassing," Amanda said, her voice lowered. "The way she dresses and that Boston accent. I've told her about the mother of the bride dress code, but you know how she is. Maybe you could help steer her towards something appropriate at our next lunch. I just don't want her to stick out in the photos." I stood frozen in my hallway, the tea I'd been bringing her growing cold in my hands. In that moment, I realized just how ashamed my daughter was of me. The wedding preparations intensified my exclusion from Amanda's life. I'd imagined helping my only daughter choose her wedding dress, but instead received a text with a photo of the one she'd already purchased with Caroline, a $60,000 Vera Wang. "It's perfect, right?" the message read. I swallowed my hurt and replied with enthusiasm, wondering how much debt she was accumulating for this single day. When I gently brought up budget concerns, Amanda bristled. "The Westbrooks expect a certain standard mother." James's cousin had Elton John perform at her reception. At the bridal shower, hosted at the Westbrook mansion, I was seated at the far end of the table away from Amanda and the bridesmaids. My gift, a handmade quilt incorporating fabric from Amanda's childhood dresses, was opened last and quickly set aside for the designer handbags and jewellery that elicited appropriate gasps of appreciation. My friend Susan, the only person I'd been allowed to invite, squeezed my hand under the table. "You don't deserve this treatment, Lorraine," she whispered. "That quilt is worth more than anything else here." A week later, I discovered something that turned my hurt to anger. While organising my home office, I found bank statements showing a $50,000 withdrawal from my retirement account that I hadn't authorised. The signature on the transfer form looked like mine, but slightly off. When confronted, Amanda's face went through several expressions before settling on indignation. "You promised to help with the wedding. The Westbrooks are contributing over $100,000. I thought you'd want to do your part." By forging my signature, Amanda, that's nearly half of my retirement savings. "Don't be so dramatic. It's an investment in my future. Once I'm married to James, we'll pay you back double." But something in her eyes told me she had no intention of repaying the money. Besides, she continued, lowering her voice, "Caroline says a mother should be willing to sacrifice anything for her daughter's happiness." The constant comparisons to Caroline Westbrook became a refrain. Caroline wore Chanel. Caroline served this wine. Caroline would never raise her voice, each comparison driven like a tiny wedge between us. 2 weeks before the wedding, I tried to connect with James, hoping to better understand the man my daughter was marrying. I invited him for coffee when Amanda was busy with final dress fittings. He arrived 20 minutes late, checking his watch and phone repeatedly. "I appreciate you making time, James," I began. "I realise we haven't had much chance to talk, just the two of us." "Yes, well, things have been quite busy." His smile was practiced empty. "I just want to know that you'll take care of Amanda. She can be sensitive underneath that confident exterior." He looked at me with something like amusement. "Amanda is very capable, Lorraine. She knows what she wants and goes after it. It's what makes us perfect together." "And what is it that you want, James?" I asked. For a split second, something cold flickered in his eyes. "The same thing everyone wants. Success, security, building a legacy." As he spoke about their future plans, the house they would build, the connections they would make, I noticed he never once mentioned love. At the rehearsal dinner, I was seated at a table with distant relatives, while Amanda glowed at the head table between James and Caroline. Edward Westbrook gave a speech about welcoming Amanda into their family's circle of trust, with several meaningful glances at James that made me uncomfortable. I caught a strange look passing between father and son, something secretive that raised the hairs on my arms. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. Despite everything, excitement fluttered in my stomach as I dressed in my navy blue mother of the bride dress, purchased under Caroline's supervision, of course. I'd imagined being with Amanda as she prepared, helping with her veil, sharing precious last moments before she became a wife. Instead, I received a text instructing me to arrive at the church an hour before the ceremony. No mention of the bridal suite or preparations. When I called, Amanda's maid of honor answered. "She's really busy right now with hair and makeup. Caroline is helping her dress. Why don't you help the florist check the pew arrangements?" I stood in the magnificent stone church, watching strangers transform it with thousands of dollars worth of white roses and silk draperies. $200,000 for a single day, more than Michael and I had paid for our house. As guests began arriving, I found myself thinking of Amanda as a little girl, spinning in the backyard, in her favourite pink dress, letting me brush her long blonde hair before bed. When had that loving child become this cold young woman who treated me like an inconvenience? The Westbrooks arrived in a flurry of air kisses and expensive perfume. Caroline looked me over with a tight smile. "The dress works well enough, Lorraine. Perhaps a bit matronly, but it suits you." Edward barely acknowledged me, already deep into his second scotch of the morning. His face was flushed, his movements too expansive. As Caroline steered him away, I overheard him muttering something about Michael's daughter and perfect symmetry. Confused, I followed at a distance, trying to catch more of their conversation. They ducked into a side room, but the door didn't close completely. "Keep your voice down," Caroline hissed. "This is not the time or place." "I just find it goddamn poetic," Edward replied. "All those years of planning and now the Miller account comes full circle. Michael would roll in his grave if he knew. James said you're not to mention any of this. He's handled it perfectly without your interference." I stepped back, mind racing. The Miller account. My late husband's name. What connection could possibly exist between Michael's business and the Westbrooks? Before I could process this information, I bumped into a woman exiting the restroom, Bethany, one of Amanda's colleagues. "Mrs. Stanley, the church is gorgeous, isn't it?" Amanda must be thrilled. We exchanged pleasantries until she mentioned meeting James. Such a small world. I remember him from the Harvey financial case a few years back, when I worked for the DA's office. "Corporate Investigation Division," she added, seeing my confusion. "Never went to trial, but messy business." I was surprised when Amanda started dating him, given the connection. Before I could ask what connection she meant, she was whisked away by another guest, leaving me with more questions than answers. I found a moment alone in a quiet corner of the church, trying to make sense of these strange comments. Michael had owned a construction supply company that went bankrupt shortly before his death from a heart attack. The business failure had devastated him, but I'd never understood the details, only that a major account had fallen through, triggering a cascade of financial problems. As the ceremony time approached, I realized no one had come to escort me to my seat. I entered the church alone, watching as James' mother was ceremoniously led to the front row by the best man. I was directed to my seat by an usher who seemed uncertain where I belonged. The ceremony itself was beautiful, but felt strangely impersonal. Amanda was stunning in her gown, but her eyes passed over me as if I were just another guest. When the minister asked who gives this woman in marriage, it was Edward Westbrook who stood alongside me, his hand firmly on Amanda's arm as if staking a claim. "Her mother and I do," he announced, though we had never rehearsed this arrangement. I held back tears as I watched my daughter pledge herself to James, unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The subtle, triumphant glance James directed at his father after the vows sent another chill through me. At the reception in the Fairmont Estates Grand Ballroom, I found myself seated at a table far from the wedding party with distant cousins and Amanda's former co-workers. The mother of the bride traditionally sits with the family, but Caroline had rearranged the seating charts without consulting me. "Family should be together," she'd explained breezily when I questioned it, "and Amanda was concerned you might feel uncomfortable with all the attention." The real message was clear: I wasn't considered family. During the dinner, Tom Fisher, an old friend of Michael's, stopped by my table. "Lorraine, good to see you after all these years. Beautiful wedding." We chatted briefly about old times until he mentioned, "Strange to see James here." I thought it might be awkward given everything that happened. "What do you mean?" I asked. Tom looked confused. "With his father's company and Michael's bankruptcy, I assumed that's why I saw James at Michael's funeral, making some kind of peace. Was surprised when I heard Amanda was dating him years later. Small world, I guess." My heart seemed to stop. James was at Michael's funeral, standing in the back. I remember because I thought it was either very respectful or very cold given the circumstances. But Amanda hadn't met James until 2 years ago through a mutual friend at a charity gala. At least, That's what she'd told me. As Tom wandered off, my mind raced through scattered pieces of a puzzle. Edward's comment about the Miller account coming full circle. Bethany's surprise at Amanda dating James, given the connection James at Michael's funeral, and now this revelation. I suddenly remembered Michael's former business partner calling the house repeatedly after his death, insisting there had been something suspicious about the account that bankrupted them. I'd been too grief-stricken to listen, focusing instead on raising Amanda alone. Could James's family have had something to do with Michael's business failure? It seemed far-fetched, yet the coincidences were mounting. I watched James and Amanda during their first dance, wondering if my daughter knew about any of this. Her adoring gaze as she looked up at him suggested not. As the evening progressed, I steeled myself to speak with James directly. I found him alone at the bar during a brief lull in the festivities. "Congratulations again, James," I said, maintaining a pleasant smile. "Thank you, Lorraine. Enjoying the celebration." His tone was polite but dismissive. "Very much, though I've been having the strangest conversations, people mentioning connections between your family and my late husband that I wasn't aware of." His hand tightened imperceptibly around his glass. "Oh well, Boston's business world is small, bound to be some overlap. The Miller account specifically," I said, watching his face carefully. Edward mentioned it earlier. The flash of shock in his eyes confirmed my suspicions before his expression smoothed over. "My father enjoys his scotch a little too much at events, talks nonsense sometimes. So there's no connection between Westbrook Investments and the account that bankrupted my husband's company 15 years ago." James stared at me for a long moment, calculation evident in his gaze. "Ancient history," he finally said, neither confirming nor denying. "Best left buried, don't you think, especially today?" As he spoke, I saw Edward approaching, his face thunderous. James quickly excused himself, intercepting his father and steering him away with urgent whispers. I stood frozen, the truth slowly crystallizing. Somehow, the Westbrooks had been involved in Michael's downfall. And James, had he sought out Amanda deliberately, knowing who she was? Was this entire marriage some kind of revenge or business strategy? The thought made me physically ill. I watched in horror as James returned to Amanda for the cake cutting, whispering something in her ear as they posed with the knife. Her smile faltered, her eyes finding me across the room with sudden fury. Before I could process what was happening, Amanda was striding toward me, her wedding gown billowing around her face, contorted with anger. The room seemed to hush as guests sensed the building confrontation. She stopped directly in front of me, trembling with rage. "How dare you?" she hissed. "How dare you try to ruin this day for me?" Without warning, her hand flew up and struck my cheek with stunning force. The slap echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom. 200 pairs of eyes fixed on us as my head snapped back from the impact. In that crystalline moment of perfect clarity, everything fell into place. The calculated pursuit, the lavish wedding, the systematic separation from my daughter, it was all part of some twisted plan. James hadn't chosen Amanda for love. He'd chosen her because of who her father was. Instead of the tears everyone expected, I felt a strange, calm certainty wash over me. A small laugh escaped my lips as I looked directly into my daughter's eyes. "Now I know," I said quietly. Amanda's anger transformed into confusion, then fear. The colour drained from her face as something in my expression made her step backward. Her confident smile faltered completely. "Know what?" she whispered, but her eyes said she was afraid of the answer. Caroline appeared at Amanda's elbow, smiling tightly at the stunned guests. "Just wedding day emotions running high," she announced. "Let's continue with the celebration." But Amanda couldn't move, staring at me with growing horror as the implications of my words sank in. "What did James tell you about your father's company?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the red mark burning on my cheek. "What are you talking about?" Amanda's voice shook. She turned to look for James, who was making his way toward us with barely concealed panic. "I think we need to talk privately," I said. "All of us." James reached us, putting a possessive arm around Amanda's waist. "This isn't the time or place for family discussions," he said firmly, attempting to lead Amanda away. "On the contrary," I replied, "I think your new wife deserves to know exactly what she married into today." A murmur rippled through the watching guests. James's jaw tightened as he glanced around at the audience we'd attracted. "Fine, 5 minutes in the sitting room. Then we're returning to our guests." As we moved toward the private room off the main ballroom, I saw Edward being restrained by Caroline near the bar, his face flushed with alcohol and anger gesturing in our direction. Once the door closed behind us, Amanda rounded on me. "What are you doing? You're embarrassing me in front of everyone." "Amanda," I said gently, "did you know James was at your father's funeral?" Her expression confirmed she hadn't. "What? No, that's impossible. We met at the Kensington Foundation Gala 2 years ago. Did he approach you first?" I asked. "Did he happen to mention where he worked before you told him about yourself?" James stepped forward. "This is ridiculous. Lorraine is creating drama. Answer me, Amanda," I insisted. My daughter's certainty wavered. He knew my name already, said we had mutual connections." She turned to James, doubt creeping into her expression. "You never mentioned knowing anything about my father." "Because there was nothing to tell," James snapped, but his composure was cracking. "Then explain why your father keeps mentioning the Miller account. The exact account that bankrupted Michael's business before his death. Explain why you were at his funeral. Explain why your colleagues are surprised you're marrying the daughter of Michael Stanley." Amanda's eyes widened. "James, what is she talking about?" The door burst open before he could answer. Edward Westbrook stumbled in, ignoring Caroline's attempts to restrain him. "Enough of this nonsense," he slurred. "We've waited 15 years for this. 15 years to close the circle after what your husband did to us." "Edward, stop!" Caroline hissed, but he was too far gone. "Your precious Michael stole millions from us through the Miller construction deal," he continued, jabbing a finger toward me. "Left us exposed to an SEC investigation while he walked away with our money. Then had the convenient heart attack before we could prove anything." "That's a lie," I gasped. "Michael died bankrupt. We nearly lost our house." "Because he hid the money," Edward roared. "Offshore accounts we never found, but we got our revenge. We made sure his company collapsed completely." Amanda had gone deathly pale, looking between her new father-in-law and husband. "James," she whispered, "is this true? Did you know who I was when we met?" The calculated mask James had worn for so long finally slipped. "It wasn't like that. Not entirely." "Tell her," I demanded. "Tell her the truth." James ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Yes, I knew who you were. We'd been tracking the Stanley assets for years, convinced Michael had hidden funds somewhere. When I saw you at that gala, I thought—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "You thought you could get close to me to find the money," Amanda finished, her voice hollow. "Initially, yes," James admitted. "But that changed. I fell in love with you, Amanda. That part is real." Amanda stepped away from him, tears streaming down her face. "Was anything about us real, or was I just the Stanley asset you finally managed to acquire?" "This is why I never wanted children," Edward muttered. "Too emotional. The point was to bring the Miller interests back under Westbrook control through marriage. Love is irrelevant." Caroline slapped her husband's arm. "Shut up, Edward. You've said enough." I moved to Amanda's side, tentatively reaching for her hand. To my surprise, she didn't pull away. "I think," I said quietly, "that your new husband and his family have been planning this for a very long time, and I think they've been using both of us." For the first time in years, Amanda looked at me without judgment or criticism, just raw, wounded vulnerability. In that moment, she wasn't the polished, ambitious woman who had slapped me in front of 200 people. She was my little girl again, hurt and confused, needing her mother. "What do we do now?" she whispered. I straightened my shoulders, looking directly at James and his parents. "That's for Amanda to decide. But whatever happens, I won't let you hurt my daughter anymore." James stepped forward, reaching for Amanda's other hand. "Amanda, please. What started as business became real. I love you." She looked at him, tears still flowing. "I need time to think. I can't do this right now." "We have 200 guests out there," Caroline interjected. "Whatever family drama is happening needs to wait." "For once, I agree with Caroline," I said. "Amanda and I will return to the reception. We'll smile and pretend everything is fine, but this conversation isn't over." I led my stunned daughter toward the door, pausing to look back at the Westbrooks. "And just so you know, there was never any hidden money. Michael died heartbroken and penniless, destroyed by what your family did to him. If you'd spent less time plotting revenge and more time looking at the actual evidence, you'd have known that." As we walked back into the reception, Amanda squeezed my hand tightly. For the first time in 15 years, I felt like my daughter was truly seeing me. The week following the wedding was a blur of emotional phone calls and difficult conversations. Amanda and James had cancelled their honeymoon to Italy, choosing instead to stay in Boston and confront the foundation of lies their relationship had been built upon. Amanda initially called me in a rage the day after the wedding, blaming me for publicly humiliating her. "Everyone is talking about it. The bride slapping her mother, you laughing like some kind of psycho. How could you do this to me?" "Amanda," I replied calmly, "I didn't create this situation. James and his family did, and they've been manipulating both of us for years." After the initial shock and denial came the pain. 3 days after the wedding, Amanda showed up at my door, mascara streaked down her face. I simply opened my arms, and she collapsed into them like she hadn't done since she was a teenager. "I don't know what's real anymore," she sobbed as we sat at my kitchen table. "I thought he loved me. I thought I knew him." "I know, sweetheart. I know. And I've been so awful to you," she continued, fresh tears flowing. "I treated you like you were something to be ashamed of when you've always been there for me, even after I took your money, even after I slapped you in front of everyone. I'm your mother," I said simply. "That doesn't change no matter what." But I also knew things needed to change between us. As Amanda's tears subsided, I took her hands in mine. "I love you unconditionally, but I won't be treated the way you've been treating me. If we're going to rebuild our relationship, it has to be based on mutual respect." She nodded slowly. "I understand. I want to try." Over the following weeks, Amanda began untangling the web of manipulation James and his family had woven. She discovered that James had deliberately positioned himself at the charity gala, where they'd coincidentally met. She found emails between James and Edward discussing the Stanley situation, dating back 3 years. Most painfully, she learned that the Westbrooks had indeed orchestrated the collapse of her father's business, calling in loans and leveraging their banking connections to ensure Michael couldn't secure emergency financing when the Miller project fell through. "They as good as killed him," she told me one evening, her voice hollow. The stress of losing everything triggered his heart attack. Yet surprisingly, James seemed genuinely remorseful. When he came to my house to apologize, alone without his parents, I saw a different man than the calculated socialite who had married my daughter. "What I did was unforgivable," he said, unable to meet my eyes. "It started as my father's vendetta. I was raised on stories about Michael Stanley, the man who supposedly cheated us. Following his orders and pursuing Amanda seemed like family loyalty. And now," I asked, "now I know I was wrong. About everything." The SEC investigation eventually cleared Michael completely, but my father refused to believe it. He needed someone to blame for his own bad investments. I wasn't ready to forgive James, but I could see he was suffering too. Caught between loyalty to his toxic family and genuine feelings for Amanda that had developed despite his original intentions. 3 months after the wedding, Amanda asked me to join them for dinner. They were in couples counselling, she explained, working through the betrayal while deciding if their marriage could be saved. "I don't know if I'll ever fully trust him again," she confided as we prepared dessert in my kitchen, James waiting in the living room. But I need to find out if what we have now is worth saving. For my part, I focused on my own healing. With Susan's encouragement, I started therapy, reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during Amanda's wedding preparations, and even booked a solo trip to Maine, something I'd always wanted to do but had repeatedly postponed. Most importantly, I stopped measuring my worth through Amanda's eyes. Whether she chose to remain with James or not, whether we fully rebuilt our relationship or not, I knew my own value. A year later, we gathered to celebrate Amanda's 30th birthday, a small dinner at her apartment with just the three of us and Susan. Amanda and James were still together, working through their issues day by day. Edward had been removed from the family business after a health scare, and James had severed most ties with his parents. As we shared cake and coffee, I watched my daughter, more genuine and grounded than I'd seen her in years. The painful truth revealed at her wedding had stripped away her obsession with appearances and status. The woman who emerged from that crucible was stronger and more authentic. "I've been thinking a lot about forgiveness," Amanda said as the evening wound down. "Not forgiving James or his family for what they did, though that's part of it, but forgiving myself for how I treated you, Mum." The return to Mum instead of mother hadn't escaped my notice over the past year. "Forgiveness isn't something you earn," I told her. "It's something you receive and then extend to yourself. I forgave you long ago. The question is whether you can forgive yourself." She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm working on it every day." As I drove home that night, I reflected on the strange, painful journey we'd travelled. A slap at a wedding had exposed years of lies and manipulation, but it had also cleared away the pretense and status-seeking that had driven my daughter away from me. Sometimes the most painful moments in our lives become the doorways to truth and healing. The Westbrooks had intended to use my daughter to complete their revenge against my husband. Instead, their scheme had ultimately led to something they never expected: a stronger, more honest bond between mother and daughter than had existed for years. If you've ever had to rebuild a relationship after betrayal, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. How did you find your way back to trust? And if you found this story meaningful, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories, and share with someone who might need to hear that even the deepest wounds can eventually heal. Thank you for listening, and remember, the truth may hurt, but secrets destroy. Until next time, take care of your heart and those you truly love.